Okay, now we are going to reassemble the upper receiver from a detailed armor's level strip. Okay, first thing we're going to replace is the recoil spring plunger, and the plug that holds those in place. The large hole in the front of the receiver, put that guide rod or plunger into that receiver and then seat it as far as it'll go. There is a flat spot inside the receiver right there that will set up against. Alright, a neat little trick to do this is to use a tool, screwdriver, or a punch that's the same size as your plug, something along those lines. I use a little bit of a taper punch because it'll fit inside the spring, and use that to guide the spring down into the hole, and use it to push the spring down inside the hole past the level of the drift pin hole. Use a drift pin punch that's small enough to fit in there, drive it in there to hold that spring down, just like that. Get that spring held down, take your plug, put your plug in place. If yours fits loose enough that you can just push it in, great, which mine doesn't. But if not, just give it a couple of taps so it's in there far enough to stay in place. Pull that drift pin or that drift punch out, and then finish tapping that in until it's flush. Once it's flush, replace the roll pin. Just tap it until it's almost flush, and then switch to your plastic nylon to flush it up. Once you've got that flushed, roll it over, and you should see the recoil spring assembly fully seated into its recessed cutout. To replace the trigger pin, this cutout, when it's in place, needs to face towards the direction of that roll pin hole. Notice the firing pin is tapered. If you pay close attention to your spring, there's a large end and a small end. The small end needs to go over the firing pin so that a few coils of the spring stick up above the level of the firing pin. That keeps it from protruding through the hole in the receiver. If you put that on upside down, the firing pin sticks up above the spring, and when you assemble it, the firing pin will stick out the front of the receiver face and won't recoil back. So make sure that's installed properly. Roll the receiver over and insert it from the back into that hole right there, again with the cutout facing towards the outside of the gun where that roll pin hole is. Just set it in there, drop it in, use your finger or screwdriver or something to rotate it if it rolls out of position like it just did on me. Push it in there, hold it in place, and then while holding that in place, just drive your roll pin in. A couple of taps should be all it takes to have that in there far enough to stay. Just use your finger to lightly depress that. It doesn't have to go real far. Give it a few taps to get that in there. Once it gets close, flip it over your nylon punch, and then roll it back over and check. It should be sticking up, the rounded part should be sticking up just slightly, and should depress easily, and then spring back. The firing pin is installed. The last part, of course, is the extractor. There's your extractor channel. The extractor has the plunger spring and the plunger. Just like the firing pin, there's a small end and a large end. The plunger fits into the large end, and that flat cutout in the plunger faces in towards the inside of the receiver because it is what holds the tail on the bottom of the extractor, and that's what holds the extractor in place. So, small end of the spring in first, goes into the ejector cutout with the flat part on the plunger facing in towards the inside of the gun. Need to depress this plunger, tiny little screwdriver. Depress that plunger as far as it'll go, and once you've got it depressed, and with that depressed, insert the extractor this direction in that position so that the flat part where the plunger is cut out is holding the extractor in place. Just like that. Now that is your completely reassembled upper receiver.